They vanished without a trace, but the sea kept their secret. In July of 1994, Playa del Carmen was a hidden paradise on Mexico's Riviera Maya. It wasn't the mass tourism destination we know today. It was a fishing village with pristine beaches, crystal-clear turquoise waters, and a laid-back vibe that drew backpackers from all over the world. Luxury hotels had not yet invaded every inch of the coastline. The sacred cenotes remained untouched. Nights were filled with beach bonfires and out-of-tune guitars strumming Bob Marley songs. But beneath those idyllic waters, something was waiting. Something that would turn the Caribbean dream of 18 young travelers into their family's darkest nightmare. 30 years later, after a sepulchral silence, an underwater camera would capture a deeply disturbing image. A red JanSport backpack, perfectly preserved, was wedged between coral formations. A skeletal hand was still clutching its strap. The sea salt had bleached the bones, but a silver ring, inscribed with Sarah and Michael forever, shone, untouched by time. Sarah Lindström was 23. A Swedish anthropology student, she had saved for 2 years cleaning offices in Stockholm to pay for this trip. Michael Torres, 25, a Californian bartender from Venice Beach, kept a journal where he wrote terrible poems about every sunset he witnessed. They would never see another sunset. They would never write another postcard. They would never call home again. This is the story of the 18 backpackers who never returned. Be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation. And let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Sarah Lindström wasn't just a name on a missing persons list. She was the eldest of 3 sisters with a crescent moon-shaped mole on her left cheek and a contagious laugh that her mother Astrid still hears in her dreams. The day she disappeared, she was wearing her favorite t-shirt, a faded Nirvana tee she'd bought at a flea market in Copenhagen. Her denim shorts had a Rolling Stones patch clumsily sewn onto the back pocket. Her red JanSport backpack was adorned with pins from bands and countries she had visited. Thailand, India, Guatemala. Michael Torres was different, tall and lanky with curly hair always tousled by the sea breeze. On that July 26th, he wore a ridiculous Hawaiian shirt he'd bought as a joke in Cancun. His khaki cargo shorts were filled with seashells and stones he'd collected from the beaches. His red Converse sneakers were so worn out that his right big toe peeked through a hole. On his wrist, he wore 3 string bracelets woven by Mayan children in Tulum in exchange for a few pesos. Lucas Hoffman, 21, from Berlin, was the youngest of the group. An engineering student, he had decided to take a gap year against his parents' wishes. His mother, Greta, still has the last postcard he sent from Playa del Carmen, dated July 24th. It reads, "Mom, this place is magical. I've met incredible people. Tomorrow we're going snorkeling at some secret reefs a local knows about. I love you. Lucas." The postcard has a coffee stain on the top right corner and, even today, still smells faintly of sea salt. Isabella Rossi, 24, from Florence, Italy, was an amateur photographer who obsessively documented every moment of the trip. Her Canon AE1 camera, a graduation gift from her father, held a roll of film with 24 exposures. The first 18 photos were developed by the Mexican police. Images of sunsets, the group laughing on the beach, Michael making funny faces, Sarah sleeping in a hammock. The last 6 shots were never taken. Isabella was wearing a white cotton dress with Mexican embroidery she'd bought at the local market, braided leather sandals, and a straw hat that the wind constantly tried to steal. In her black Eastpak backpack, along with her inseparable camera, she carried a sketchbook where she drew the faces of people she met on her travels. The group had met at the Cocopelli hostel, a cheap but clean place just 2 blocks from the main beach. On the night of July 25th, The four of them had been drinking Coronas on the hostel's terrace, planning their excursion for the next day. The hostel's logbook, which miraculously survived Hurricane Wilma in 2005, shows their signatures at 11:47 p.m. that night, as they returned from a dinner of fish tacos at a street stall. Months later, in November 1994, the hostel owner found an unsent postcard under a mattress in rooms where Sarah had been staying. It was addressed to her younger sister, Emma. "Little sis, I've met a boy. His name is Michael and he writes the cheesiest poems in the world, but he makes me laugh. Mom would hate him, you would love him. Tomorrow we're exploring underwater caves. Wish you were here. Love, your big sister who's always getting into trouble." July 26, 1994, dawned like any other day in Playa del Carmen. At 5:47 a.m., the sun began to paint the horizon in shades of orange and pink over the Caribbean Sea. Local fishermen had already been on the water for an hour, casting their nets while pelicans circled overhead. The temperature was a pleasant 24 degrees Celsius, with a gentle easterly breeze that promised a perfect day for the water. At 6:30 a.m., Doña Carmen, the cook at the Cocopelli hostel, started breakfast. The aroma of scrambled eggs, refried beans, and fresh tortillas drifted through the hallways. Sarah was the first one down, still in her pajamas, her blonde hair tangled. She poured a cup of coffee and sat on the terrace to watch the sunrise. At 7:15 a.m., Michael appeared with his poetry notebook and began reading her his latest terrible verses. Sarah laughed so hard she almost spit out her coffee. Lucas came running down at 7:28 a.m., stumbling on the last step as he did every morning. Isabella arrived last at 7:45 a.m., already dressed, her camera hanging around her neck, snapping photos of her half-asleep friends. By 8 o'clock a.m., the group was gathered at reception. Jorge Ramirez, the night clerk, saw them leave. He would later recall that Michael had forgotten his hat and had to run back for it. Sarah carried a small blue waterproof backpack with snacks and water. Lucas hauled the snorkeling gear they had rented. Isabella, as always, documented everything. At 8:23 a.m., the owner of a corner grocery store, Maria Delgado, saw them buy 4 bottles of water, apples, and crackers. Maria remembered the blonde girl, Sarah, speaking broken but understandable Spanish, and that Michael had bought mint gum. At 8:45 a.m., Carlos Mendoza, a street vendor selling shell necklaces, saw them walking north along the main beach. He tried to sell them his crafts, but they told him, maybe on the way back. Carlos would never forget those words because for them there was no way back. At 9:10 a.m., the last confirmed sighting occurred. Elena Gutierrez, a waitress at the Las Palmeras restaurant, saw them pass by. She recalled they were now with other backpackers, a larger group of about 18 people. Some carried bodyboards, others snorkeling gear. They all seemed to be heading to the same spot, a small cove known locally as Caleta Azul, about 3 kilometers north of town. The group had arranged to meet other travelers for an impromptu excursion. This wasn't unusual. In 1994, Playa del Carmen was a place where adventure wasn't pre-packaged or regulated. At 10:30 a.m., the group of 18 arrived at Caleta Azul. A fisherman named Esteban Cuo, mending his nets on the beach, saw them. He would later testify that a dark-skinned man about 35 with a Caribbean accent that wasn't Mexican seemed to be leading them. This man, who introduced himself as Captain Jack, had promised to take them to pristine reefs and underwater caves that only locals knew about. At 11 o'clock a.m., the group entered the water. Esteban watched as they split up. Some snorkeled near the shore. Others, including Sarah, Michael, Lucas, and Isabella, followed Captain Jack into deeper water. The sea was calm, visibility perfect. Esteban returned to his nets. At 11:45 a.m., something changed. Esteban noticed the backpackers near the shore looking towards the horizon with concern. Two French girls got out of the water and asked him if he had seen the others. Esteban pointed to the northeast where he had seen Captain Jack lead them away. The girls said they hadn't seen them for over 30 minutes. By 12:30 p.m., panic began to set in. They had been waiting for an hour. Captain Jack had said the cave exploration would take 45 minutes at most. A Canadian named Thomas tried swimming out to find them but returned exhausted, having seen nothing. Around 1:30 p.m., the remaining travelers walked back to Playa del Carmen for help. Their first stop was the local police station. At 2:47 p.m., Officer Pedro Hernandez took their report, but he didn't consider it urgent. "Tourists always get lost and turn up drunk hours later," he wrote. Among the belongings left on the beach was a disturbing detail no one noticed at the time. On a tourist map, several locations were marked with a red X. One of them, aggressively crossed out, was a notorious dive bar called El Pirata Negro, which had mysteriously closed 2 weeks earlier. The first 48 hours were a chaos of incompetence and lost opportunities that sealed the fate of any rescue. The Playa del Carmen police force consisted of just 12 officers. They had no boats, no diving equipment, and no search protocol. Officer Hernandez waited until 6 p.m. to inform his superior, Commander Ricardo Molina, who was celebrating his daughter's birthday and did not want to be disturbed. Molina ordered him to wait until morning. This fatal decision meant the real search didn't begin until 22 hours after the disappearance. On July 27th, a rudimentary search was organized. 3 local fishermen were hired to sweep the area in their small boats. They had no radios and no coordinated plan. The official report, a mere half-page long, presumed accidental drowning and contained errors in the victims' names. False leads muddled the investigation. A local drug dealer was arrested with a similar backpack, but he had simply stolen it from the beach. American divers reported seeing bodies in a cave, but a Navy team that arrived 3 days later found only rock formations. On August 8th, a forensic team from Mexico City arrived. Their first observation was devastating. The scene had not been preserved. Belongings had been moved, handled, and stolen. The beach had been swept clean by municipal workers. No photographs of the original site had been taken. The most crucial error occurred on August 10th. A 67-year-old Mayan fisherman, Jose Maria Balam, came to the police station. He claimed to have seen a suspicious vessel on the morning of July 26th. He described a medium-sized yacht with no visible registration number and 3 men on board who did not look like locals. The officer on duty, Juan Carlos Perez, spoke no Yucatec Maya, and as a result, he misinterpreted half of the testimony. He wrote only that the fishermen had seen a tourist boat, dismissing the rest of the information as irrelevant. 2 months later, Jose Maria Balam died of a heart attack, taking any crucial details with him to the grave. The second formal suspect was investigated on August 15th, Roberto El Pulpo Herrera, a dive instructor with a record for trafficking Mayan archaeological artifacts. Several witnesses placed him in Playa del Carmen in the days leading up to the disappearance, where he was seen loitering around hostels, offering special tours at suspiciously low prices. His alibi was weak. He claimed to have been in Tulum all day on July 26th, but he couldn't prove it. However, with no physical evidence connecting him to the missing, he was released on August 20th. The investigation grew more complicated when, on August 25th, the families of the missing began to arrive in Mexico. The Lindstroms from Sweden, the Torres family from California, the Hoffmans from Germany, the Rossis from Italy. Embarrassed by the international media coverage, the Mexican government promised to spare no expense. Professional divers were brought in from Veracruz, a side-scan sonar was rented, and a reward of 100,000 pesos was offered for information. But it was too little, too late. The ocean currents had had a month to disperse any evidence. Witnesses had begun to mix real memories with rumors. Some swore they had seen the backpackers in Cancun days after they vanished. Others claimed it was all a conspiracy by the Juarez cartel for organ trafficking. The real investigation drowned in a sea of conspiracy theories and false leads. The final report, dated September 30th, 1994, officially concluded that the 18 backpackers had died from accidental drowning due to adverse sea conditions and a lack of experience in deep water. It did not explain why not a single body, not a single floating possession, not a single piece of wreckage was ever found on the nearby beaches. Commander Molina was discreetly transferred to another jurisdiction. The case was filed away in a dusty drawer where it would remain for 20 years. The years that followed 1994 were an endless purgatory for the families. Every July 26th, without fail, they would gather in Playa del Carmen. At first, there were crowds, family, friends, curious onlookers, journalists. By the 5th anniversary in 1999, only the closest parents and siblings remained. By the 10th, in 2004, some of the parents had already passed away, taking their grief to the grave without ever finding answers. Astrid Lindstrom, Sarah's mother, established a ritual she would keep for 20 years. Every anniversary at dawn, she would walk to Caleta Azul with 18 white candles. She would light them one by one, speaking each name, and let them float out on small wooden rafts she built herself. "The sea took them, the sea will bring them back," she would repeat in her native Swedish as the waves carried the lights toward the horizon. In 1996, the first false sighting brought both devastation and hope. An Australian tourist swore he had seen Sarah Lindstrom working in a bar in Belize. She had the same mole on her cheek, the same hair color, the same height. Astrid immediately flew to Belize City. The woman turned out to be Sandra Lindsay, a British national who had been living there for 3 years. The resemblance was extraordinary, but it wasn't Sarah. Astrid wept in the airport for 6 hours before she could board her flight home. 1998 brought another cruel hope. A fisherman found a black Eastpak backpack on a remote beach near Xcalac, 150 kilometers south of Playa del Carmen. It looked like Isabella Rossi's. Her father, Giovanni, traveled from Florence to identify it. The backpack was so deteriorated by the sun and salt that it was impossible to confirm. But inside, wrapped in plastic, was a notebook. The pages were fused together by moisture, illegible except for fragments. Giovanni thought he recognized his daughter's drawing style on one page. He took it back to Italy and kept it in a glass case in his study. The year 2000 marked a dark turning point. Hans Hofmann, Lucas's father, took his own life. He left a note. "I'm going to look for my son in the only place I haven't looked." His wife, Greta, found his body in the garage. He had been obsessively investigating the case, spending the family's savings on private detectives, traveling to Mexico 4 times a year. The walls of his study were covered with maps, photos, and newspaper clippings, with red strings connecting clues that existed only in his grief-shattered mind. In 2003, a German investigative documentary titled Verschwunden im Paradies, Disappeared in Paradise, revived interest in the case. The filmmaker interviewed surviving family members and locals. One of the most unsettling testimonies came from a Mayan shaman who lived as a hermit in the jungle. He claimed that on the night of July 26, 1994, he had seen lights under the water, like drowned stoiduji, and heard screams that the wind could not carry. The documentarian tried to dive in the area the shaman indicated but found nothing. 2008 brought the most elaborate sighting. A construction worker in Cancun called the police, claiming his boss, a mysterious man known only as Jack, matched the descriptions of Captain Jack from 1994. This Jack had allegedly been drinking heavily in a cantina and had muttered about the kids from '94 and how the sea keeps its secrets. When the police went to investigate, the man had vanished. His documents were fake. His apartment was empty except for a nautical chart of the Quintana Roo coast, with several areas marked in red. The 15th anniversary in 2009 was especially painful. Only 6 family members made the trip to Playa del Carmen. The town had changed beyond recognition. Where backpacker hostels once stood, luxury resorts now loomed. Caleta Azul had been privatized by a hotel development. The new owner allowed them to hold their ceremony, but only on the condition that they not speak to the press. Capitalism had paved over the tragedy. In 2012, a tropical storm battered the coast. A group of divers assessing reef damage found fabric remnants snagged on coral 40 meters deep. It appeared to be part of a Hawaiian shirt. The Torres family traveled from California with renewed hope. The DNA tests were inconclusive. The material was too degraded. It could have been Michael's. It could have been anyone's. It could have been there since before 1994. The case was officially and permanently archived on July 26, 2014, exactly 20 years after the disappearance. The Mexican Attorney General's office declared that without significant new evidence, there was no reason to keep the file active. The records were digitized and stored. The physical evidence, what little remained, was destroyed to make space in judicial warehouses. But there was a detail that went unnoticed in 2014. A retired fisherman named Sebastián Cuo, brother of Esteban, who had been a witness in 1994, gave the police his deceased brother's fishing log. In the entry for July 26, 1994, Esteban had written in a trembling hand, "Strange lights under the water at Cueva del Silencio like underwater lanterns, but there are no divers. The spirits are restless. I will never fish there again." The police filed the logbook away without reading it. It would remain in an evidence box for another 10 years. On March 12, 2024, at 9:43 a.m., everything changed. Dr. Marina Castellanos, a marine biologist from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, was leading an expedition to document coral bleaching off the coast of Quintana Roo. Her team of 6 researchers was using a state-of-the-art underwater drone, the Sea Explorer 3000, equipped with 4K cameras, side-scan sonar, and a dive capacity of up to 200 meters. The objective that morning was to document a colony of elkhorn coral showing unusual signs of recovery. The location was a system of underwater caves 2.7 kilometers northeast of what was once Caleta Azul. Now part of the Grand Paradise Resort complex, the drone descended along the reef wall, transmitting real-time images back to the research vessel. At 47 meters, the sonar detected an anomaly, a metallic structure that did not match the natural topography. Dr. Castellanos adjusted the controls, guiding the drone toward the signal. What the camera revealed in the next few seconds would be forever seared into her memory and into the evidence archives. First, the red JanSport backpack appeared, incredibly preserved by the anaerobic conditions of the cave. The colors were faded, but the pins were still there. Rock bands, country flags, peace signs. Then came the image that would chill anyone's blood. A skeletal hand, the bones bleached by 3 decades of salt water, still clutching the backpack's strap. A silver ring on the 4th finger glinted as the drone's LED lights illuminated it. The doctoral student operating the sonar, Roberto Mejia, vomited over the side of the boat. Dr. Castellanos, with 30 years of marine exploration experience, had to sit down and breathe deeply before she could continue. She ordered the drone to explore further. What they found over the next 45 minutes was a submerged graveyard, skeletal remains, scattered but identifiable. Shreds of clothing caught on rock formations. A single red Converse sneaker, the left one, with the bones of a foot still inside. A shell necklace the water had failed to destroy. And then, the most significant find, a Canon AE-1 camera in its watertight housing, miraculously intact, wedged between two rocks as if someone had deliberately placed it there. But there was more, something far more horrific. The bodies were not scattered randomly as would happen in an accidental drowning. They were clustered in an air pocket within the cave, 15 meters from the submerged entrance. Forensic experts would later determine they had died there, trapped when the tide rose and sealed the only way out. They had had air, perhaps for hours, perhaps for days, as the water slowly rose. Dr. Castellanos followed protocol. She stopped the exploration, marked the GPS coordinates, sealed the area, and immediately contacted the authorities. Within hours, the site was cordoned off by the Mexican Navy. The Attorney General's office took control of the case. For the first time in 30 years, there was real, tangible, horrifying evidence. The forensic recovery team arrived on March 13th. Specialized Navy divers began the delicate task of retrieving the remains. Every bone, every fragment of cloth, every personal item was cataloged, photographed, and preserved. The process would take 3 weeks. In the end, they recovered the remains of at least 16 individuals. 2 were never found. The 2024 investigation had resources that would have seemed like science fiction in 1994. The National Genomics Laboratory began the process of extracting DNA from the skeletal remains. Despite 3 decades underwater, tooth enamel had preserved enough genetic material for comparison. The surviving families, notified discreetly, provided saliva samples from their home countries. On March 27, 2024, the first positive match came back. The remains, marked as J7, belonged to Sarah Lindstrom. Her mother, Astrid, now 78, received the news in her Stockholm apartment. She didn't cry. "After 30 years," she said, "I have no more tears." She felt only a strange sense of relief. "At last, I know where my little girl is." 3D reconstruction technology allowed them to map the cave with millimeter precision. Specialized software recreated the ocean currents of July 26, 1994, based on historical meteorological data. The simulation showed something disturbing. It was virtually impossible for 18 people to have accidentally ended up in that specific cave. The entrance was 12 meters deep, requiring a swim against the current through a passage barely 1.5 meters wide. Someone had led them there, someone who knew the cave system perfectly. Isabella Rossi's Canon AE-1 camera became the key piece of evidence. Technicians at the National Institute of Forensic Sciences worked for 72 straight hours to extract the film without damaging it. They used a controlled environment darkroom, specialized chemicals for degraded film, and infinite patience. Frame by frame, the images emerged from the past. The first 18 photos were the ones the police had already seen in 1994. The happy group, oblivious to the horror that awaited them. But there were 6 more exposures Isabella had managed to take inside the cave. The images were blurry, shot with a flash in the darkness, but they told a story. Photo 19. The group swimming, following a blurred figure, presumably Captain Jack. Photo 20. The cave entrance from the inside with natural light still visible. Photo 21. Smiling faces illuminated by flashlights exploring the rock formations. Photo 22. A disturbing image. The cave entrance, but now completely submerged. Photo 23, faces no longer smiling but terrified, huddled together in what appeared to be an air pocket. Photo 24. The final unfocused image showed only darkness and what appeared to be hands reaching for the camera. The partially recovered video was even more revealing. A French tourist in the group had brought a high-8 camcorder in an underwater housing. The water had destroyed most of the tape, but 3 minutes and 27 seconds survived. The audio was inaudible, but the images clearly showed the group entering the cave, led by a man of medium build with tanned skin and what appeared to be a distinctive tattoo on his right shoulder. A black octopus, its tentacles coiling down to his bicep. A search of the digitized 1994 files revealed something everyone had missed. Roberto El Pulpo Herrera, the dive instructor who was investigated and released, had that exact tattoo. But there was something more. The migration records, now digitized and searchable, revealed a glaring anomaly. El Pulpo had left Mexico on July 27, 1994, the day after the disappearance, bound for Belize. But there was no record of him ever returning to collect his belongings or close his business. On April 15, 2024, investigators made another crucial discovery. Among the recovered remains was a diving knife, engraved with the initials R.H. Roberto Herrera. But what was most disturbing were the cut marks found on some of the bones, specifically on the ribs of 3 victims consistent with defensive wounds. This hadn't been just an accident. There had been violence in that cave. Forensic analysis of the remains revealed that 6 of the victims had been positively identified: Sarah Lindstrom, Michael Torres, Lucas Hoffman, Isabella Rossi, Jean-Pierre Dubois, a 26-year-old from France, and Emma Thompson, a 22-year-old from Britain. The other remains were too fragmented or lacked familial DNA samples for comparison. The investigation took a dark turn as detectives began to connect threads that had been loose for 3 decades. Roberto El Pulpo Herrera was not just a dive instructor with a minor record. Declassified DEA files showed he had been investigated in 1993 for possible links to a trafficking network that used underwater caves to move merchandise between Mexico and Belize. Captain Jack and El Pulpo were the same person. The survivors from 1994, re-interviewed with digitally enhanced photographs, confirmed the identification. But the question remained: why would he lead 18 backpackers to their deaths in that cave? The answer came from an unexpected source. On April 20, 2024, Maria Elena Herrera, Roberto's niece, contacted the investigators. Now 52, she had kept a secret for 3 decades. Her uncle had returned to the family home in Chetumal on the night of July 26, 1994. Soaked, trembling and muttering incoherently about a mistake that they shouldn't have been there. According to Maria Elena, Roberto had been involved in something more sinister than simple drug trafficking. He was part of a group that believed in distorted ancient Mayan rituals, specifically sacrifices to Chayak, the god of rain, to ensure good tourist seasons. 1994 had been a particularly dry year, affecting tourism. The group, composed of desperate local businessmen and superstitious criminals, had decided that a gift to the sea was needed. But something had gone terribly wrong. Roberto had planned to take only 4 or 5 backpackers, the most isolated, those without connections. He hadn't counted on the group spontaneously growing to 18 people. Once in the cave, as he tried to execute his plan, he realized his mistake. There were too many. Some were good swimmers, there was resistance. In the chaos, the tide rose faster than expected. Roberto barely managed to escape, leaving everyone else trapped. Investigators found corroboration in the municipal archives. In August 1994, three local businessmen, owners of hotels and restaurants, had made unusually large donations to the local church for the prosperity of Playa del Carmen. One of them, Ernesto Villalobos, had died in 2003. Another, Carlos Mendizabal, had disappeared in 1997. The third, Alejandro Cortez, was living in a nursing home in Mérida with advanced dementia. The most disturbing connection came when they reviewed unsolved cases from the region. In September 1993, 4 Israeli backpackers had disappeared under similar circumstances near Tulum. In June 1996, a group of 3 Japanese students vanished while diving in Puerto Morelos. The patterns were identical. Small groups, isolated backpackers, disappearances in the water, bodies never found. The chief medical examiner, Dr. Eduardo Ramirez, presented his final report on May 3, 2024. The marks on the bones suggested at least 3 victims had been attacked with a sharp object, likely the recovered dive knife. The positions of the bodies indicated that some had died by drowning as the water rose, but others may have succumbed to their wounds or asphyxiation before the water ever reached them. There was evidence of survival cannibalism on at least 2 sets of remains, suggesting that some had survived for days in the shrinking pocket of air. The most devastating testimony came from the analysis of the cave walls. Using multispectral imaging technology, investigators found scratch marks, some forming words. Help in English, Hilfe in German, aiuto in Italian. And more chillingly, a longer message etched with something sharp, likely the broken crystal of a watch. Day 3. Jack left us to die here. Sarah Michael Lucas. Isabella still alive? Others dead? Water rising? If found, tell our families we fought, we loved, we tried. Investigators discovered that Roberto Herrera had used at least 5 different identities between 1990 and 1997. Forged migration records showed a clear pattern. He would enter Mexico under one name and leave under another. The network of corruption that protected him included immigration officers, local police, and at least one federal judge. The most shocking discovery came on May 10, 2024. A diver found a second chamber in the cave, deeper and sealed by a collapse that appeared intentional. Inside were much older remains, some dating back to the 1980s. Forensic archaeologists counted at least 30 additional sets of remains. The cave had been a place of death for at least a decade before 1994. Among these older remains, they found something that connected everything. Identical necklaces made from human teeth and shells, each with a small obsidian pendant in the shape of an octopus. It was the cult's mark. Every victim had been marked post-mortem. The 18 backpackers of 1994 had been only the latest in a long line of sacrifices. The final analysis revealed the complete method. The victims were led into the cave during low tide, when the entrance was accessible. Once inside, the guide would leave and partially block the entrance with rocks, leaving only a small opening. As the tide rose, water would rush in quickly, but escape would become impossible. The victims were trapped in the shrinking air pocket until they inevitably drowned or died of dehydration days later. Roberto Herrera had perfected this method over years. He knew exactly how much time he had before the tide sealed the cave. He knew which rocks to move to block the exit. He knew how to make it all look like a tragic accident. What he didn't calculate on July 26, 1994, was that the group would be so large that some might try to follow him to the exit. The defensive wounds suggested a fight had broken out. Roberto had been forced to use violence to escape, leaving his knife behind. The true horror was the premeditation. In Sarah's backpack, preserved by the anaerobic conditions, they found a flyer for Captain Jack's adventure tours that she had picked up days before. The flyer promised an exploration of secret caves only the locals know, and an experience you will never forget. The flyer had a fake address and a phone number that never existed. What you are about to discover is more disturbing than you can imagine. If you think you can handle it, continue watching. And remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Roberto El Pulpo Herrera was never captured. On May 15, 2024, Interpol issued an international arrest warrant, but it was 30 years too late. Investigators traced his movements to Belize in 1997, where he had worked under the name Captain Robert, leading diving tours. After that, the trail went cold. Some believe he died, others that he changed his identity again and could be on any coast in the Caribbean, perhaps still taking unsuspecting tourists on dives. On May 27, 2024, it was discovered that Alejandro Cortez, the only surviving businessman from the supposed cult, had left a recorded confession before dementia consumed him. In the video, dated 2018, he admitted to financing Roberto's operations in exchange for favors from the ancient gods. He mentioned other names, other places, other disappearances, but his fragmented mind mixed reality with delusion. It was not actionable evidence. On July 26, 2024, exactly 30 years later, the families gathered one last time in Playa del Carmen. This time they were not alone. Hundreds of people, locals and tourists, joined them. The Mexican government, in a belated attempt at symbolic justice, organized an official ceremony. A memorial was unveiled, 18 white crosses facing the sea, each bearing a name, a nationality, and an age frozen in time. Astrid Lindstrom, now frail but determined, spoke for all the families. For 30 years, not knowing was worse than death itself. We imagined our children somewhere, perhaps with amnesia, perhaps as prisoners, perhaps simply choosing not to return. Now we know the truth. It is horrible, but it is the truth. The sea did not take them. Human evil did, but in the end, the sea protected them, preserved them, and returned them to us. Giovanni Rossi, Isabella's father, added, "My daughter died doing what she loved, exploring, documenting. Her last photos are a testament. She knew something was wrong, and yet she had the presence of mind to record it. She was a journalist to the very end." The remains were cremated in a private ceremony. The ashes, mixed together, were scattered into the sea from a Mexican Navy vessel in deep water far from any cave. Each family received a small urn with a symbolic portion. The recovered personal effects were returned. Sarah's ring, Michael's book of poems miraculously legible on some pages. Lucas's watch, stopped at 2:17, likely p.m. on July 27th or 28th. Isabella's camera, now in a photography museum in Florence. The case didn't end the day they disappeared, but when the ocean decided to speak. After 30 years of keeping the secret, the currents, technology, and chance conspired to reveal the truth. It was not justice in the traditional sense. There was no trial, no conviction, no punishment for the perpetrators. But there were answers, there was closure, there was finally peace. If you've made it this far, it's because this story has touched you deeply. Subscribe to the channel and activate all notifications so you don't miss the next case. Comment which case you'd like me to investigate next. Do you know of an unsolved case in your country? Let me know in the comments. Give this a like if you want more stories like this, and share this video with someone who appreciates well-researched true crime. We'll see you in the next case.